Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Estrela webinar and Behind the Curtain of Selective College Admissions. My name is Christina Dooley, and I am the founder of Estrela Consulting, which is a college planning firm based in Ohio. And I am very excited because this is our year two of hosting this topic and this webinar. Last year, we had a great panel. It was very well received, a lot of fun as well. So we decided to have a repeat performance with a couple new folks. And so I'm excited that you're all joining us tonight. I'm also really thrilled to be joined by my incredible colleague, Amber Gilsdorf, who's our Director of College Planning at Estrela, and she'll be handling the Q&A function later on. So if you've got questions during the webinar, please feel free to throw those into the Q&A. Amber will field those at the end. The chat is disabled, so you won't be able to chat in that space, but you can add things in the Q&A section. I was just telling our lovely panelists that we are very good about trying to keep on time. And by that, I know that their time is incredibly precious, especially in August. And so we are very cognizant of the fact that we're taking them away from a lot of other things. And so we will begin the Q&A at 7:30 very promptly and wrap up by 7:45. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. I'm really excited because, again, we've got people who, although they said yes fairly easily, I don't know if that's just us, but they were very kind to say yes to agree to do this. But we've got Rick Barth, who is from Clemson University, Sam Prouty from Middlebury, and Kevin Ramos-Glew from Dartmouth. And those are three different kinds of schools. They are all fairly selective schools. And so that's why we've brought them here. And they will bring different perspectives to the questions that we'll ask them this evening. Some of their answers may be the same, but some of them may actually be very different. I will say that I do want to put a little asterisk on everything that these gentlemen say this evening. And that is that they are speaking primarily on behalf of their institutions and their experiences with their student populations and what they're looking for. So while they are coming from selective institutions, their answers don't necessarily reflect every selective institution. So I'll just say that. I don't want you to feel like we're putting you guys on the spot that you have to answer on behalf of all of your peers. So without further ado, one of the things that I want to mention is that I just said we're launching. We've already launched halfway into August, more than halfway into August. Oh my gosh, it feels like it was just August 1st. We are in the throes of the application cycle, and we know that a lot of things have changed over time, especially the last 5 years. And at Estrela, one of the questions that we get all the time, and I'm going to throw this out, I'm going to reorder some of the questions and then the way we had them last year. One of the questions that we're getting now, because there's been some changes in terms of the testing landscape, and by that I mean some schools that were test optional during the pandemic have now started going back to requiring testing. And even in the last week, we've heard about a couple. And so my question is for those schools that are still test optional, we have two on the screen, tell me a little bit about what does that test optional piece mean in terms of a selective institution? Because as you know, a lot of parents, students will say they're test optional, but not really. They're not really, because they really want us to submit scores. So Rick, you're chuckling a little bit. So I'm going to throw it to you. At Clemson, does test optional mean test optional? What are you looking for?
Yeah, Christina, it truly does mean test optional. So when a student applies test optional, and about 40% of our applicants came in test optional out of the 61,000 that we got this past year, there is a little bit more weight that is put on the class rank if the student is coming from a ranking school. There's a little bit more weight put on the rigor of the curriculum they choose. There's a little deeper dive into the type of activities that they participate in. But the committee does not see the test score. If they say they are test optional on their application, even if they submit the test, the committee will not see it. So we are truly test optional.
And one of the questions, or I should say, one of the pieces that was mentioned during our webinar last year, I think is worth repeating, and it might have actually been you, Sam, that mentioned this, was a great indicator of whether or not test optional means test optional is to look at a school's percentage of students who are admitted, who applied test optional, and look at that compared to the percentage of students who actually go ahead, Sam, you can say it better than I can.
Well, no, I know you said it, but so at Middlebury, about half of our students apply without testing. And when you look at who gets admitted, it's also about half of the class. We don't set out to make that happen. That just happens organically. And I think that goes to show that the testing is not that, it's just not that big a deal, frankly. And I think, we could go on and on all night about this. As somebody who's done this for 25 years, I can tell you, I didn't want to go test optional. I wanted those tests, but I also don't really miss them. There's a lot in an application, transcripts, grades, rigor, what your teachers say about you. We can figure who you are out, who you are academically fairly easily. I will also say, frankly, at the highest levels of selectivity, even great testing, believe it or not, doesn't really help, because let's say you rocked out a 1590, good for you. Most kids who can get a 1590 are straight A students. If you can get a 1590 and you're not a straight A student, I'm going to want to know why you're not a straight A student, right? Because the 1590 tells me that you have academic horsepower that, for whatever reason, is not finding its way to the pavement. If you have, a B- average and a 1590, you're probably not getting in anyway. So truthfully, the testing doesn't really add that much, even when it's there. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm trying to be conscious of time, when we look at testing, we are not looking at a raw number. And what I mean by that is, a 1470 is better than a 1270, right? Not necessarily. Where does that 1470 come from? Are you attending a school that is a very high testing school, right? If you go to, I'm from the Boston area. If you go to Wellesley or Newton North or Newton South or Winchester or Concord Carlisle high schools, these are, affluent towns with high levels of college achievement among parents. Those folks can afford testing, tutors for their kids. It's a high achieving area. But down the road in Lawrence, Massachusetts, the valedictorian of that school is still a great student, but they're a great student coming from a culture that is less of a testing culture, right? And so, not every number, the number does not exist in a vacuum, is what I'm trying to say. And so when we're looking at it, I'm not looking at a raw number. I'm looking at, what is the school's average? What is the average in the community from which you come? There's all kinds of things that go into it. But bottom line, at least for my school, if you've rocked out a test and you want us to see it, fine, we're happy to see it. And if you don't want us to see your testing, that's fine too. No sweat.
Thank you for that. Speaking of the context of the school, one of the questions that we've been getting more and more, and actually as a heads up, we'll be doing a webinar in a few months on this topic. One of the questions we've been getting from students and parents is the role of APs in the application review, and what does that play in a selective school? And I think the reason I'm bringing it up now, Sam, you're nodding your head. I think that part of that is context-based as well, in terms of what's offered. Kevin, do you, in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
But don't let my good friend Kevin off the hook, because he's the one person here who is from a school that put testing back as a requirement. So everybody out there should be hearing from Kevin too, because he might have a very, very different answer than what we just gave.
Okay, we can absolutely do that. Kevin, tell us why has Dartmouth brought back testing requirements?
We didn't bring it back. We simply took our finger off the pause button. Because we always say we were test required, required testing before. And the reason we paused it was for equity purposes, because not everyone could access the test. I guess should I invoke the words of Einstein, who said not everything that counts, not everything that's been counted counts, and everything that counts, can be counted. And I think part of that is that people, like as Sam's point, a 1590, we look at it in context. But one other piece to make you further believe these two is that last year, for the year before we decided to require again, we actually called it test recommended. So that also shows that neither of these two said that, which means they have the data to prove it, that they look at it both sides and both sides get in. But last year when we called it test recommended, we were also hyper aware that when a high selective school, an Ivy League school, says recommended, people see that with capital letters. So I think it shows there's even a further distinction between the perceived binary of optional and required, that there's even a middle. So, but on the AP, my answer would be the same as Sam's answer earlier, is that if your school doesn't have APs, or if your school has 4 APs, we're not looking for you to take 12 at some neighboring school or online. Like, you take the most rigorous curriculum that is available to you in your context. And we're not expecting you to manufacture it or spin gold out of a curriculum that's not there. So we really look at it that way. And I've had people say, if my kid can take 16 their senior year, should they? And it's like, that it all depends on the context of each kid in each situation. I mean, there's plenty of kids who get in with no APs because their school doesn't offer them.
Yeah, so I'll put you on, any of you on the spot on this question, though, to just because obviously parents and students often think that there is some kind of magic number. You hit this threshold of APs and you're good to go. You've checked all the boxes. What you're mentioning, students taking the most rigorous curriculum that's available to them. And let's say there's a senior and they do have availability to take APs. They could fill their entire senior course load with APs, but they opt to take something that is an elective of some sort that brings them joy. Tell me how that looks when if it's a student who's been taking rigorous classes all along. When you're reviewing that, truly, this is a real question that we get. Will they think I'm lazy? Will they think I'm taking it easy, literally by not taking one extra AP? Any thoughts, Rick?
Yeah, I can, from a Clemson standpoint, in my committee consists of 5 people, which combined have 120 years of experience in admissions work. And so they're very skilled at looking at a transcript and seeing what the student has done. And they would love to see that. They would love to see a student that has worked very hard, challenged themselves, especially we do admit by major. So especially challenge them in courses that are going to directly apply to their major, and then take that type of elective you're talking about. And if they end up with, 7 APs versus 12, my committee's fine with that. They want to see a well-rounded applicant. They want to see someone that has both pushed themselves, but both explored as well.
So you just piggybacking on that for a second, because it's not exactly the same, but you mentioned admitting by major. And that's something that I don't believe the other 2 schools do that. But Rick, you at Clemson, that's important in the application. Can you share with those people watching how that impacts the applicant review process? Because we do have families, we hear from families and our colleagues in the school counseling world and independent counseling world, often we hear about students who want to try to work it a little bit so that they are admitted. You know what I'm talking about. So maybe address that, Rick. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, what's interesting about a school like Clemson that admits by major is you have different selectivity by major. For example, for an out-of-state student that's applying to nursing, that's acceptance rate's going to be 11-12%. For that out-of-state student that is applying to business or engineering, you're looking at a 36% acceptance rate. So it's very different. The reason for that is the amount of students that each of these programs want enrolled. So where it gets confusing for families is something like graphic communications, which might not be necessarily a selective major somewhere else. Clemson only wants to enroll 65 graphic comm students each year, so that becomes a very selective major at that point. The danger of trying to game the system, because I get that question, as you can imagine, every day from families. Well, what if they apply? They really want to be nursing, but what if she applies education? Because the state of South Carolina, like most states, needs educators. So it is not quite as competitive for students that apply for education. The problem with that is if you come in as an education major, you're not going to be able to change your major into nursing. Nursing has a cohort that goes through as a cohort. They might allow 1 or 2 major changes early in the year, but most of our highly competitive programs, whether it's architecture, landscape architecture, nursing, sports comm, graphics comm, they're not going to allow a lot of students to change their majors. So it's very important for students to put the major that they truly want to do. I have this conversation every year. If you want to be a nurse, go somewhere where you can be a nurse. If you do not get admitted into Clemson with nursing as your first choice, please go somewhere where you can be a nurse if that's your passion.
That's great advice. Thank you.
And can I just say, I think even though Sam, you're right, Sam and I don't have people apply by major, I find that sometimes kids don't trust their counselors or their parents or their teachers in our liberal arts schools, and they go down some rabbit hole on Reddit or something, and they say, oh my gosh, 10% of the kids at this college, Dartmouth, Middlebury, we're philosophy majors. I'm going to put that down. And our point is your application's telling your story, your recommendations telling your story. Don't put something down that's not going to be echoed or buoyed by your interest, your extracurriculars, and your passion, your essays. And especially, again, if you think you're gaming the system, because like your story tells itself in some ways, and so will yours. So really go with what is true, what is real, and what you really care about.
Can I go back half a topic and just to
Yeah.
the laziness point? I'll quote my good friend Kevin and say, take the most advanced coursework that you can possibly take, but then I will add the caveat that you also want to take. So if you're a passionate creative writer and your choice in that block on your schedule is the creative writing elective at your school or AP Physics C, and you don't understand gravity, then don't take physics. Take the creative writing class, especially if that's a passion of yours. Most colleges that I know of like to basically see, all like what we say 5 years of 4 solids, right? And so if you're not going to take senior year fill in the blank, senior year AP Science, that's fine. Replace it with creative writing, replace it with economics. Just don't replace it with, introduction to the alphabet, right? I mean, that, as long as we're still seeing sort of sustained rigor across the disciplines. The one thing that I do think makes us think you're a little bit lazy or taking your foot off the gas is, you've hit a number of your graduation requirements. So you sign up for 3 solids and a bunch of free periods. And we see, weightlifting and weightlifting 2 and advanced weightlifting and the alphabet revisited. Now I'm going to have a problem. But short of that, yeah, take advanced classes and take what you want.
Thank you. So let's say let's shift to this because you're talking about a great creative writing student. What if, tell me a little bit about the role of the essay and the review process for selective colleges like all of yours, because we know not all of these students are those kids who are going to shine in terms of creative writing. And we all know that that's not this assignment. This is not a creative writing assignment. And we know that, but students don't feel that way. And I will say, Amber and I talk about this frequently about the amount of time sometimes that our students really spend on just trying to get it right. And we try to tell them there's not a right, that's not the purpose of the essay, but that's a really hard thing for a student and parents to really understand. So tell us, and maybe Kevin, why don't you start the role of the essay? What do you, when you're reading it, what are you looking for?
Yeah, and I should, by the way, I should have started this whole thing off by letting everyone know that like this cobbler, it hopes his kid doesn't go shoeless. I have a senior as of, I guess, next week, my son starts his senior year. And I promise you, I'm following so much of the advice, like what Sam just said. Like he had the opportunity.
You're taking notes.
He could have taken Dartmouth offers classes to area high school kids. And he said, it's going to take a lot of shuffling in my schedule to create extra free blocks to do it. I don't want to do it unless it's only going to guarantee me something. It's not worth the overhead. And he said, so it was a really beautiful way for him to look at it that way. So anyway, back to the essay, I always say, like, you're looking at your audience. Like, I think kids really have to understand that their audience isn't like this intimidating building behind me. It's these humans. And I think across the board, you have bleeding hearts that are like nerds reading these essays. We all are really curious people. We all read, we're all like passionate, loving, bleeding heart people. So you have an audience that I think is like a sponge, and you have an audience that's, you're competing for some of our eyeballs' attention. So I think keep in mind, there's the urgency of capture our attention. But remember, you're writing to really nice people. We're discerning and data driven, but in this moment, like you have a great audience. And I always remind people of that, like the likable people that you go and meet on tours or at info sessions, same people. That said, I often think that don't your essays, your grades speak for themselves, for better, for worse. And let's say it's for better, and you're like Sam described, 1590 in all A's. Well, why would you like waste our reading time to repeat that for us and use it as a repeat? Like, tell us something original, tell us something new. And trust your gut. I think, again, don't use Mad Libs. And maybe I'm dating myself, but don't use essays that work and fill in words like Middlebury, Vermont, or South Carolina and Hanover, New Hampshire for ours. Like, really write an authentic one. But I look forward to the essay because I'm like, here we go. This is what holistic reading is all about. Let me get to know this kid, and I really want to know you. I know you're smart. I know you're a good student. Tell me something else. Tell me something real, vulnerable, authentic, something I didn't expect. And don't try to be different for the sake of it, but really tell your story. I'm telling you, I get excited about reading essays.
And I
Yep.
would imagine, just like what you said with the applicant pools that you're getting, to your point, Kevin, these are students that they're academically, you know, they're strong. You're trying to probably get a sense of their personality. Who are they? Like, well, what's their role going to be? And sometimes I'll tell my students, you know, think of you and your 6 friends, and you're sitting around and you're all wearing t-shirts with one word on it. That's your role. What does your word say? Who are you? Tell us more about that. They want to get the context of what you're doing outside of the academic day as well. And so I think that's really important. Sam, were you going to chime in with something?
Well, and you said it actually, Christina, but you know, my guiding questions are, who are you right now? Who are you in the process of becoming? And how can we help you to become that person if you come to our school? Who are you going to be on my campus? Who are you going to be as a friend and a roommate and a classmate and a teammate and a lab partner and an alum 30 years out? At Middlebury, we have a very high percentage of students who marry their fellow students whom they've met in college. So, you know, like, who are you going to be as a 59-year-old spouse to your Middlebury classmate someday, right? 40 years hence. And so, you know, to me, the essay, I'm a former English teacher. I love reading these things. If you're not answering those questions, right? Who are you? What makes you tick? You know, how do you see the world? What's your story, right? If you're funny, you can be funny. If you've got a story to tell, then tell that story. But you know, any kind of resume regurgitation, you know, it was the big game and we won it. You know, those sort of trite kind of things that anybody could say, frankly, you know, avoid those. And I'm a car nut, so forgive the analogy out there if none of you understand this, if you're not car people. But at our level of selectivity, you know, there's lots of numerically perfect, right? Like a Toyota Corolla is numerically perfect. It's inexpensive, it's efficient, it's reliable, and it will last forever. But nobody has ever said, like, man, if I get $1 million, I'm going to get me a Corolla, right? Let's just be honest. So you can be numerically perfect and not very exciting. And the essay is what puts the humanity in that file, whether you're numerically perfect or not. The essay is what lets us see you and hear you and feel you and hopefully hear that voice coming off the page. And, you know, that can make all the difference. Not between an A student and a C student, but within that realm of numerically competitive, that's the thing that makes you really stand out. And that makes us get excited in committee and say to our friends around the room, this is the one. Yo, this is Kevin. And Kevin wrote that essay about how he loves to breed albino ferrets and then let them loose in the, you know, greater New Hampshire landscape. And boy, that was actually, we probably shouldn't take him. But you know, that those kinds of things that only you can say, that makes you jump out, whether you're numerically perfect or not. But very few admissions people want to enroll an entire class of Toyota Corollas.
So that's a good segue to question about activities. You know, right now, I think one of the best things that the Common App did a while back, but it used to be that all the spots for the activities were just there. And now they have it where you can individually add as you go. You can add an activity so that it doesn't look like you've got 10 spots you must fill in. So when you're looking at a student in their activity list, I assume that again is just descriptor information that helps you shape who that student is, maybe reasons why you want the Corolla. But what would be, Rick, on the activity list, is there anything in particular that you'd be looking for, or what's jumping out? What don't you care about?
Sure. The committee at Clemson is really looking for leadership positions, and that doesn't have to be student body president. It can be team captain of the volleyball team. It can be any type of position where this person is in charge of planning events, where they are a peer leader among their peers. And they really look for something that is an engaging opportunity where the student's truly engaged in it and not just a one-off or something that appears that they're just trying to impress the committee with it. They really want to see some activities outside of school as well, engaging, you know, in their local community. And again, if it's things like for our agriculture majors, they want to see, FFA, they want to see 4-H, they want to see those type of activities that tie into the academic program that that student is applying for. Can I go back to the essay for one quick second?
Yeah.
I see families struggle with this, and I just want people to know a simple essay can be beautiful. Probably the best essay I read last year was from a student who ended up at one of the other peer institutions on the panel tonight. I'm not going to mention any names, Kevin, but it was about a hobby he did with his grandfather and how it taught him his intellectual curiosity, how it developed his interest in international economics. It was simple. It was beautiful. Probably the best essay I've ever read. So that's just the only thing I was going to say. Sometimes families really overthink the essay. So,
yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think, thinking about the essay piece of it, I often tell students that it should feel sometimes more like a journal writing assignment than less as a 5-paragraph English essay, which is, they approach it that way. They're so hung up on sometimes on structure even. And Amber and some of our Estrela colleagues, we've talked with our students about creative use of flow, which can actually make a simple story pop off a little bit more than just free-form 5-paragraph standard essay like that. So, we just have a few more minutes. So I want to jump into just a couple of quick, almost myth-busting questions that I think are important for us to ask, especially of this group. One of the things we hear all the time, I asked this last year, but I'll ask it again with this group, is we hear all the time that schools such as yours will only take a certain number of students from a specific high school. Kevin, you're starting to smile. Can you please tell us true, not true?
No, not true. But I always say that it's like kids know more about us than I do. I always say we don't publish our average SAT score on the site, but anytime I speak to an audience, like, what's our average SAT score? They know. Similarly, they'll say, last year you only accepted 3 kids from my school and all 3 of them are lefties. Is it true that, it's always something? And they have to look at a trailing average. It might be up and down. So no, it's not true. We're not that myopic. We're not thinking that way. And there's schools that I've never seen and I decide to squeeze on a visit. Next thing you know, we have 2 kids from that school. And quickly before I pass it, I do want to go back to something Rick said is also, if you go to Clemson to visit and you say, wow, that school's surprisingly intimate for a big school. Well, guess what? That's because Rick's looking for those qualities in your activities and leadership and your essay. Like, we're building to, that's why we won't get replaced by AI, right? We're looking for these qualities in people. And again, just to point out that we're not gaming this, my own son was, I'm curious to see if their faces react. My son was selected for Boys State in New Hampshire. And he actually said, I don't know if I want to be into poli-sci. I know I want to go to econ. And he said, and I have a high paying job working on a farm. And he's like, I think I'm going to take the honor, not the offer. I'm sure there are people that think, no, you should have forced your son to do it. But he didn't want to pad his resume with that. And so, like, to your point, like, there's no magic recipe to put on, and maybe you can explain it. But anyway, no, there's no quotas. And we're always there. If there were, there's too big a world. If you look at the number of schools that come to our schools, they're broad and deep.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know that at least 2 of your schools have early decision. Right now, students are trying to make that choice. Should I apply ED? Is that going to enhance my opportunity for admission? Sam, do you want to speak to that? Because you guys have early decision. What do you recommend? What's the advice?
But I tell people that binding early decision is the engagement ring of the college process. It is your way of saying, I've seen them all, and you, my darling, are the one I love, so let's have a future together. And much like an engagement ring, you should think very carefully about whose finger you want to put that ring on. And what I mean by that is, if you are looking at 15 schools, do not treat early decision and I'm speaking specifically of binding early decision, because that is at most schools that offer it a bump in the admit rate. But it's designed for love. It's not designed for strategy. And so I will say that look at your school's Naviance or Score or whatever other system they use that can show you statistics. Do your homework. Early decision should not be the purchasing of a scratch ticket at the most selective school you can find. It really is meant to be matchmaking, right? So if you love Middlebury because we're big on foreign language instruction and international study, that's wonderful. I will also say that Dickinson College in Pennsylvania is a wonderful school for international study and language. And if you do your homework and you realize through that homework that, you know, your GPA and overall level of rigor and sort of where you sit in the pecking order of your school's rank or senior class or whatever, and if you look and see that, you know, gosh, I love Mid and I love Dickinson, they're, you know, equally, they both give me what I want. Mid has a, you know, a 12% overall admit rate. I don't know what Dickinson's is. It's a little higher, not a ton higher, but at that, you know, start making smart choices, right? Because if you apply early to just the farthest reach, thinking that it's a lottery ticket you might win, then you're really wasting the opportunity, right? So I would say it's a combination of, you know, do you love that school? And do you think you have a realistic shot at being admitted? An early decision is not going to fundamentally change that, right? So the student with, you know, a B average applying early to my school is still statistically very, very unlikely to get in. But maybe there's some other school out there with a higher admit rate that kid also loves, and maybe they should think about doing their ED there, because it can make a difference, no doubt, but it's only going to make a difference sort of within, you know, within that realm of competitiveness.
Kevin, anything else? Any other things from your side with ED?
No, very well stated.
Okay. I'll ask one more question before I let Amber go to the Q&A. Another newer phenomena that we've seen in the last few years are students participating in paid research opportunities. And by that, I mean them paying to be part of a program. There are several out there, many of them incredibly legitimate, you know, in terms of pairing them with mentors doing mentored research. My question is, how is that viewed by your admission committees, especially for those students who are thinking of going into a research-based major of some sort? Is that something that you think students should, and I should say there are free ones as well, but how do you feel about that? How do you feel about those research programs where students are essentially writing a research paper and, you know, that kind of thing? Have you seen that? Are you seeing that on your end? No?
I will say I've been talking a lot, but nobody else jumped in. Look, you can't, I'll be my usual blunt self. You can't buy interesting. You can't buy character. My daughter is interested in architecture. We sent her this past summer to an exorbitantly expensive architecture program. I can't believe we did it. You know, it has not made her a more interesting person. She's not going to get a better college essay out of it. And nobody is ever going to be impressed that she did this extremely. So I mean, she did it because she wanted to, and I was happy to provide the opportunity. And that's the reason to pay a lot of money for a summer program. But I would just say, you know, you can't, you're not going to purchase your way into your kid being a more interesting candidate. You can absolutely give them an amazing experience. So do it for the experience. But, you know, some of the most moving apps I've read are from kids who don't have that option. And they're slinging coffee at Dunkin' Donuts 50 hours a week because that's what they have to do. And I'm not going to be more impressed with somebody who did a $10,000 summer internship in neuroscience than I am with the Dunkin' Donuts kids. And so I think we can see those as the cool opportunities that they are. But, you know, we also know that paying to go to a fancy neuroscience camp does not make you a neuroscientist, at least not yet. And so, I mean, if you're looking for the value of the dollar is the experience itself, not becoming a more impressive college applicant.
Rick, you unmuted for a sec. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I couldn't have said it better. You know, for someone that's found their way into some type of STEM sort of research, that's not going to overcome a poor performance for a health professions major in their STEM courses. It's just not. So the way Sam said that was excellent.
Great.
And I spoke to a summer group recently, and I told them also don't list on your resume that you happen to be an alum of an Ivy League school because you did a summer program there. Instead, I always say if it helps you realize that I really don't want to go to a rural college because I spent 6 weeks. I love the curriculum, but I think I should go to college in Boston. It's like, guess what? There's colleges in Boston. Or if you didn't like a cold summer up here, then like there's colleges down south. So I always say the same, it's experiential. And again, I agree, Rick, I couldn't have said it better than Sam. And for anyone visiting Dartmouth, I will say it the same way he did and not quote him. And I'll just use that exact statement as my own. So thank you, Sam.
I'm going to throw it over to Amber. Amber, do you want to head to the Q&A and see what kind of questions we have for our panelists?
Indeed. I have two really good ones that seem to be centered on, like many questions seem to be centered on two topics. So the first is AP. Wondering, you know, there's advice that goes around frequently on various threads about should a student submit a 3 to a highly selective school? 3, 4, 5? And I know there's probably some context with that. We already talked about that a little bit, but in terms of score ranges, what is this myth or not about 3s with your institution?
And I'll throw in, you can also maybe answer if you see they've taken the AP course and no score is present for a class that was junior year, for example. How do you, are you sleuthing that out? What does that say? Kevin, you're smiling.
I think I'm gonna stop smiling.
Stop smiling because you get called on. Yeah.
I think, frankly, it's, I mean, think about, especially during COVID, post-COVID, there's a lot of A's in the world, and then it's up to us and our admission officers to determine schools and understand what an A means at certain schools in their territory. So I find it refreshing and good data to find out that if someone's a humanities student, and then we think get the sense they're really leaning that direction, and everything leans there, and they get a 3 on a science or a math AP, and they were challenging themselves to take that curriculum, like, it's like, guess what? Great. Maybe they're not going to become a math major, or maybe not a neurosurgeon, or maybe that's where they are at that time in their life with math or the curriculum. But it's sometimes refreshing, and the answer is yeah. People with 3s get in, and to go back to like Sam had said, no, it doesn't mean a 1590 will make up for an all B average, that type of thing. But it's certainly, we see them, and frankly, occasionally it's like when we say, if you would reframe the question with B's, it's like, yeah, oftentimes a B is a really good score because we know that that's what the school does. And it's sometimes refreshing to see a B on a transcript because not everyone's a polymath, especially if they really have a tendency towards one area in life. And so I frankly think if there's a lot of them, you know, like as Sam said, maybe you should readjust where you're applying because you're looking at it. But if you have one on there and you've taken all the APs, like, submit the score.
Any other chime-ins? Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. All right, this one, very timely with the way of the world right now. So wondering about, and I've had this come up in the work with some of my students too, students wondering about, or even their parents, if their student should write about their Jewish identity and or connection to Israel. What's your advice on that?
I would give general advice that writing about the various identities that you hold as they are important to you in your lived life is always of interest to people who do what we do, whether that's being Jewish in the current state of the world, whether that's a racial identity in a post-SCOTUS world, whether that's a gender or sexuality identity, whether it's just, you know, you're the one Republican in a house full of Democrats and gee, that makes dinner interesting, right? I think writing about the components of your identity is always fine and good and worth doing. The caution is the difference between writing something that lets us know about you and writing something that is essentially a manifesto, right? And so if you're writing an op-ed about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and, you know, what you think the solution to that is, or why people who hold an opinion that is different than yours are morons, then that's not the right way to write that essay. So as long as you're writing about you and how you navigate the world and how a various held identity has informed how you walk through the world, that's good stuff. if you find yourself, if it starts to sound more like an op-ed or a political dissertation than something that is personal, then I would say maybe you're starting to go in another direction. But I will also say, I live in Vermont. Vermont politically is a far more left state than it is a right state. I've heard a very different version of this question is, I'm a conservative. If I write about my conservative views, are a bunch of liberals going to hate me? And our job is not to engage with that. My job is to read that essay and evaluate you as a writer and try to figure out who you are in a community. And so we've admitted all kinds of kids whose identities or opinions or political stances might be very, very different than either ours as readers or what, my greater town might vote. And that's great. I mean, we want that. We want those voices. And so anyway, I'll stop there, but hopefully that's helpful.
I think it aligns with what I'm sure any IECs on this call and counselors, like what we try to share with our students, where that interpretation gets missed or parents are concerned. But yeah, I agree. There's a way to write about it that's more about you than the wider viewpoint. What about, we're back on APs, but we're on APs with a slightly different lens. What about APs and dual enrollment? So in Ohio, we call it CCP, but we have people on this call from all over. So dual enrollment, college credit from maybe the regional campus of a flagship school down the road from me, or community college where the teacher at my school can teach through some certification process this college class. Better than AP? Worse than AP? Neutral? Especially if both are offered at that school, at that high school? And
Rick
I see,
smiled.
I know, Rick smiled. That's what I was just going to say.
Well,
Yeah, you guys
like I said, I have a committee with a lot of years experience, and in some topics they are very stubborn. And this might be, as Christina introduced us, this might be one of those topics where we are all very different. My committee would much rather see AP than dual enrollment. It's just the way they are.
Yep. And please know to our admission folks here on our panel, I think I typed it even in the chat, like everything in this biz, it depends. It depends on the student. It depends on the school. It depends what they have access to. It depends on the university they're applying to. And in this case, it depends at Clemson. Here's your preference. What about Sam, Kevin, thoughts?
I can say, I think, well, I love to say that, like, if you know one college, you know one college. And in my case, like, if you know one Ivy, then you only know one Ivy. And I also think it does depend on the individual school, because if we understand a school well and think, that's weird, most of the kids who are going there do take the APs, and it seems like a great curriculum, and especially if you know the school. But I can tell you, for the dual enrollments we take, I know that I do a lot in the Bay Area, and I see a lot of kids from Foothill Community College and Skyline Community College. And we're not all of a sudden looking at US News World to see where those colleges rank. We understand that those are dual enrollment, and that's what's available to those kids. And that's great. So I will say it's not, I just had someone call me recently and say, oh, should my kid take a class at this school versus that school versus an online school? And they're kind of looking for pedigree. And I said, what's the reason they're taking it? Where's their passion lie? And what's going to be the most engaging class, as opposed to trying to think that some sort of pedigree is going to tick them up a notch just by virtue of having a name on their transcript.
That's a really good point. The why behind that, because sometimes the dual enrollment classes, I mean, they are different than the AP courses. And so I've had students take dual enrollment courses because it's truly something interesting for them, that it's a topic or even a faculty member at that institution that's teaching it, that they're really intrigued by maybe their research or something like that. So I think those are all the questions we have in the QA, but I have one, and Amber, unless there's something else, I have one final question I'd like to maybe end with, and that is, you all have been in this space for quite a bit of time, though you're all incredibly young, so I don't know how that's the case, but you have lots of years of experience, and I'm sure that there are common myths that you hear, that every year it's just on repeat. You're having to just repeat and say, not true. That's not how it works. That's completely false. I joke sometimes with families that I feel like for me in the fall, I call them myth busting Mondays, because every Friday my families will go to the football game or the soccer game or whatever and chat on the sidelines with other parents. And Monday morning, I'm answering emails from those parents who have said such and such person said this on Friday at the football game. What are your myth busting Mondays? What are the things that you wish that you could just say, this is not how it works at selective schools, even though this is what everyone thinks? Kevin, you're not smiling, but I'm going to call on you first.
Okay, I'll start by quickly saying that the most recent version that I have to find, and I think it's maybe really refreshing about this generation, which gives me a lot of hope, is the fear of fraudulence or almost over humility, where I find that this currently enrolled class and the one that's coming tomorrow or this week, their myth is that they say, I wouldn't have got in if you required testing my year. And then when I explained to them, look at your testing in context, as Sam described, like, look what school you're coming from. I'm also saying, I take offense at that. Like, we chose you, we know what we're doing. And so that's one of the myths, is that you don't belong, or we must have took the wrong, Sam Prouty. And it's like, no, have the confidence that we did our job right and we're proud of it. And we selected you for something that might be invisible that you weren't aware of. But I can tell you anecdotally, because you're dealing with the end users. I was on a flight recently with our director of financial aid coming back from it's funny, we were coming back from a conference centered on rural Pennsylvania, on access program for rural PA. And I was coming back from a Philly flight, and I happened to have two parents from my background, which was an independent school background where I used to be. And they were sitting behind us, and they, thank God, didn't see my Dartmouth sweatshirt. And they were telling stories about how to get into Ivies. And it was, I would say they were often wrong, never in doubt, maybe always wrong, never in doubt. And they were saying, has your kid published? They haven't published? Well, I can help you figure out how they can get published. You have to be published. And then one said, he's on the varsity team. He's not a captain. He's not getting it in. Everything they said, and I can understand where it came from, but it was so off and so wrong. And part of me wanted to turn around and say, hey, I just met a bunch of really interesting qualified candidates, and none of them are published. None of them are captains. One of their high schools doesn't really have, sports, but it was really hard to hear. And it was a positive feedback loop of anxiety. And one parent said, oh my gosh, I thought it was enough that I sent my kid to this school. Should I have sent him to that school? God forbid, the public school. And not realizing that you look at the numbers. But so much of what they said was thinking that the kid has to be published. And I will say on that note, and I'm going to be as candid as Sam, unless every school cancels every club at the end of every year, you probably didn't found the MUN club, and you weren't the founder of your school's newspaper, especially if you tell me you're at the oldest boarding school in the country. How did you found the yearbook? And so I think that's the other one, is the parent said, make sure you're using verbs like created this and discovered that. Like, it's okay that you didn't create the MUN club or the basketball team at your school. It's enough that you're on the team. So that's some of it for me, that don't manufacture stuff that is just, you're still 17-year-olds.
I love that. Thank you. Rick, what are your favorite myths?
Mine are in the two areas of recommendation. There seems to be some common thought that, it's more powerful to have a letter of recommendation from a trustee or a big donor than it is from your college counselor or your teacher. And, I wish we could somehow kill that idea. And the other is demonstrated interest, and the thought that can overcome a poor academic performance, because it cannot. And demonstrated interest can be overdone, in my opinion. And so it's just knowing the time and place to truly demonstrate that interest.
Thank you. I worked in a side note, I worked in college admission years ago, and I know this has happened at other institutions, so it's not unique, but one of our students sent in a shoe and said, now that I have my foot in the door, and then something else like that. And it was just over the top, right? Sam, bring us home. I know you have some kind of a gem of a myth that you want to share.
I don't know about it being a gem. I'm a car nut. And when I was young, I had all these different kinds of cars that I would love to buy someday. And of course, when I was young, I couldn't buy them. And then there came a time in my life when I could. And so I remember when I bought a BMW, and I waited my whole life to buy a BMW. And then I had it and I hated it and I hated myself because I was still myself. The BMW did not make me into the fictitious version of myself that I somehow thought it would turn me into. I'm still stuck being me. And so even though I do this for a living and I've worked in schools that have recognizable names, the myth that I want to put out there is that college admissions is not about the college. You know, Dartmouth is a very fancy name. Middlebury, Clemson are names that people know. But there are schools out there, and I say this as a dad, right? Like, what do I want from my kids? I want you to know my kid. I want you to like my kid. I want you to be a good fit for who my kid is trying to be. And if we do this process with that in mind, not with the brand name of the hood ornament of the school, because if you want it, frankly, if you want to pretend that you went to Dartmouth, just go buy a bunch of Dartmouth shirts, right? You can do that online. If you actually want an experience that will help children become the people they're trying to be, don't start with, I gotta get a BMW. How do I become the kind of person who can drive a BMW? Just be on it. Who am I really? What's the right fit for me? And you know, put the names aside. Start with those questions. Who am I? What do I need? What's going to be the place that helps me to be the best version of me that I can be? Right. And so I tell people all the time, you know, here on the East Coast in New England where I live, like I tell everybody in the world about St. Olaf College in Minnesota, which people around here where I live have not heard of as much. Like, go to St. Olaf. It's not as much of a brand name necessarily, but it's awesome. And so be open to the idea that there's awesome out there that you haven't heard of. And trust me, it's no less awesome just because it's not a brand name.
Yep. My hope is that everyone's takeaway on this is that it's like when you find out that, I don't know how true it is, but like the people making apps and social media and phones weren't letting their own kids use them because they knew how nefarious and dangerous they were. I feel like you're hearing us also say that, like, one of the things I've learned from working in this space with a crazy low acceptance rate is it's not good for everyone. It has to be the right fit. And I've also said, the line I use is if somehow you're manufacturing something, your connections can get you into a school that probably is that rigorous, a lived experience, it's be like having a 150-pound kid like me get into the NFL. It might be dangerous for me there, right? Or like, you don't want to paddle a Class 8 river if you've never paddled before. And I think it's become that reality. And so my own son has said, because financial aid is a reality for us. And I don't know how many people in the audience are thinking that. And what he said is, how many schools are going to be able to make up the delta between the most affordable option for me and what I'm carrying in loans? If I want to get a house, if I want to have a salary, if I want to, mistakenly, he's too, Sam, wants to buy that BMW, but he wants to make that. And he said, I don't know if like carrying an extra 60 grand in debt is going to help me move forward. And so I hopefully hear that we are like actually listening to ourselves with our own kids when we talk about this. And finally, I had one father say, my daughter gets into Dartmouth, it is going to change her life. I said, you're 100% right. But I don't know if it's going to, depending on the fit, it might not change her life for the better. It has to be the right fit and the readiness. Like, we're trying to make sure that they're ready for this environment.
That's a really great ending to this. I know it seems like a downer, but I actually feel like it's really good advice. And Sam, I agree with what you said in terms of, I remember last year you saying, you know, find those schools that want you and that you, instead of reverse having your list, and to your point, trying to make yourself fit into that place that really probably isn't a great fit for you. And same thing, like Rick said earlier, if there's a nursing school that you would be able to get into, you should be looking at those options. And so that's a really hard thing. I don't know about you, all of you, but I feel like, and Amber and I have been in this space for a long time as well. And I actually feel like I'm starting to see a slight shift in students who are starting to have more of that mentality, Kevin, in terms of the financial piece of it, where they're actually paying attention to the cost and paying attention to what are the implications of investments at this front end that maybe I don't need to have, that I could maybe, you know, do that later, or graduate school or whatever that is. I feel like the students are becoming a little bit more financially financially savvy than they were and asking good questions. So, and thank you for being transparent about that information too, to all of you, when you're meeting with families, we absolutely appreciate it. But okay, well, this was wonderful. Thank you for, again, taking the time. Thank you for your transparency and authenticity. We truly value that. And that's part of the reason we specifically asked the three of you. I mentioned earlier before we were live that I've had the opportunity in the last 6 months to be on all of your campuses and see all of you and hear from you, which is why I thought this would be a great group of people. And you did not disappoint. So, so thank you for taking the time. We wish you the very, very best as you head into this season of sometimes uncertainty, but we know it will turn out perfectly well for all of you. People listening to this recording or on here live, thanks for joining us. Amber did throw the websites for the school into the chat. You can go to their websites. They all have very great information, very transparent information on their websites in terms of a lot of the questions we asked actually about what matters, which I love. Thank you for that as well. But so again, thanks for taking the time and enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care, everybody.